Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm your host, Anna Bukatska, and I'm interrupting our regular series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film and TV history to bring you a bonus episode about a serial killer movie. More specifically, one of the most hyped horror film releases of the year. I'm talking about Osgood Perkins' Longlegs, which is dominating the box office and the online discourse. If you have somehow avoided the hype, Longlegs follows a familiar pattern of the serial killer movie. A rookie FBI agent, played here by Micah Monroe, is tasked with tracking down an occultist serial killer responsible for murdering several families across America. That's Longlegs, played with his usual gusto by Nicolas Cage. Podcaster Steph McKenna joins me to try and unpick the hype, the meaning, and the horrors of Longlegs. We chose to record this episode instead of watching the Euros final, so that tells you everything you need to know about our priorities. This conversation is entirely spoiler-ific, so if you haven't watched Longlegs yet, it might be best to sit this one out. Come back to it later after you've seen it. If you enjoy this episode or want to avoid Longlegs visiting your house, you might want to consider supporting the Final Girls Patreon or leaving us a cryptic Longlegs style review over on Apple Podcasts. You can also find me online, but don't send me creepy messages at Anna Be Demented. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on Longlegs. We are recording a podcast now. I'm sorry, that's my inside voice.
Is that your inside? That's your hello. How are you?
It's Longlegs. That's my Longlegs.
That is a. I can't even try to think of that now. Like, hey!
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think we should make a note for the listeners that we're recording this at the exact time that the England-Spain match is on. The two countries are going absolutely mad.
There's absolute feral energy out there.
Insane. And I really like that we're like, you know what? No, we're not going to engage with mainstream culture. We're going to talk about a serial killer movie.
When you sent me that email, like, do you need to be free for the football? I was like, Anna, fuck no. I don't need to be free for the football. Oh, thank God, me too. Thank you. Yeah, so we're doing something much more interesting, I'd argue. But,
much cooler.
Yeah, definitely.
Immensely cooler.
Much more is happening in this film, probably.
Well, we're going to discuss that. So, as we get into it, I think the first thing to lay out, and this entire conversation, I think, should be spoilerific from the start. So,
oh, thank God.
Yes, absolutely. We don't have time to fuck around with the non-spoiler section.
It would be so difficult not to spoil this.
So, the first thing I want to talk about is the hype, because the hype for this film has been overwhelming.
Yeah.
Overpowering, even. Probably the most hyped about horror film in recent memory since maybe like an Ari Aster film, like maybe Midsommar, directly following Hereditary, or maybe Us, directly following Jordan Peele's Get Out. What were your expectations going into Longlegs?
I had, seemingly, like you say, like the whole world, I had really high expectations. There's been so much marketing for this film, hasn't there? It's had one of the best trailers that I've seen in recent memory. And I think my hopes were augmented by all of the fun of that wraparound marketing, like the phone numbers you could dial and the ambiguous posters and the Birthday Murders website, like more of that. I'm absolutely a sucker for that. So I was loving it. And, the promise of an extremely dark, horrifying Silence of the Lambs Fincher-esque experience. So something we haven't, maybe haven't had since the 90s, something that we've probably all been desperate to recapture. I just, had such high expectations, and our cinema screen actually got bumped up to a bigger screen last night, and it was absolutely packed.
Hell yeah.
I don't remember the last time I went to a picture house cinema and it was that busy. It was, full to the brim. And I've also got quite pretty good relationship with Oz Perkins films. So I was kind of hopeful that this would be almost like a culmination of what he's done, you know, what he's achieved before, but sort of taken to new heights. I'm a Nick Cage fan, Michael Monroe fan. So I was going in fully open-minded, but very excited to be taken on a strange journey. I really expected atmosphere and unease. And yeah, this is probably one of my most anticipated horror films of the year. I was just dying to see it.
I love it. And also, quite interestingly, you mentioned things that are very different from the expectations I had. Similarly to you, big fan of all the talent involved. Really loved Oz Perkins' previous directorial efforts. And the marketing was tremendous. But after I saw the film, and I think I've said this elsewhere already, I thought it was mismarketed.
Yeah.
In the sense that you used, I think, for me, having watched the film twice now, atmosphere, unease are the exact right words, but what we were being sold was the scariest movie ever made.
Yeah, for sure.
And
for sure.
Independently, I really loved the film. I really loved the campaign. But after I watched the film, the first thing that popped into my mind was, oh no, there's going to be discourse because this is not a scary film.
Yep. I think scary is the wrong word, isn't it?
I
was thinking more, I mean, for me, it captured they sound like they should be similar, but terror almost rather than scary, like that sense of being overwhelmed or like overcome by a sense of kind of fear that's really sort of uncanny and ungraspable rather than sort of scary kind of, I don't know, terrifying. Like,
totally.
Do you know what I mean? So,
I know exactly what you mean.
But I do agree with you. The market, it's a funny one to land on, really, isn't it? Because I think it really markets itself as a specific aspect of this film. Like, it really hones in on the serial killer subgenre, and some of the really strong imagery. But there's this whole other world to the film that's not addressed at all. And there's a kind of playfulness to the film as well that isn't obvious at all from the marketing. Like, I don't think you'd expect to have fun in this film.
Absolutely. And there's some great comedic moments.
Yeah, really funny.
So I kind of stand by my point that I respect the marketing campaign that they've done. It clearly worked because the hype was tremendous around it. And critics who got to see early screenings of the film were loving it, and I think it's doing good box office, so I think audiences are loving it too. I do expect a bit of discourse around the expectation that was set by the marketing campaign.
Yeah. It's that scariest film ever thing, isn't it?
I know.
But then I was also thinking we've kind of reached a point where our expectations are something that, like, I think they are so, like, our expectations of films now are quite high. And I think it's something that even we can't, if I said to my friends, well, what did you want from it as a scary film? They might not even be able to fully articulate it. It's just kind of like, well, it just wasn't as scary as I thought it was gonna. So people are looking for something. And I don't know whether it's like, is it like not enough jump scares, or I'm just not really sure.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a much larger conversation. I actually write about this in my book.
Perfect plug.
I know. I'm sorry. I apologize. But it's this thing of we're going to judge a horror film based on how much it scared us, because that's the promise that was being made. And and this is not even a worry. It's just an observation. You know, Oz Perkins is going to be fine. He's made another 2 movies already. And, you know, this is going to hugely elevate his career, I think, just the amount of anticipation and the wildly positive reception that Longlegs has had. But yeah, I think just for general audiences, general horror fans, just planting that seed of this is going to be scary, this is going to mess you up. I'm like, you're setting up the film and the audiences to expect whatever fear means to them. And I think what he's going for is, like you said, atmosphere, unease. And those are like much more, those are moods, you know, they're not necessarily scares.
Yes. And there's probably a lot of people, you know, in the screenings for the film that when we saw it last night, that probably don't go and see a lot of horror films. So, you know, I'm thinking about, Oz Perkins' sort of previous films and other films that deal with sort of that mood and atmosphere. And it's like, that might not be something that other people are kind of fussed about or registering at all. They do, they want to come in for it. They've been promised a big scare, as you say, and they've kind of made the effort to go to the cinema to see that big scare horror film of the year. And it's kind of, maybe not living up to expectations.
Or maybe it will completely surprise them and be like, oh my God, I didn't know that horror films could do this, and have, sort of lodge themselves in your heart and in your blood and just chill you for an hour and 41 minutes. And yes, that is the exact runtime of Longlegs. I know this for reasons. But you mentioned Oz Perkins' previous films. Are you a fan of his 2 prior films, The Black Coat's Daughter and I Am the Pretty Little Thing That Lives in the House?
Yeah, I would say yes. Like, that's not a tentative yes, but it is a yes. I've watched The Black Coat's Daughter and I'm the Pretty Thing when they both came out. Admittedly, I haven't rewatched them since, but I do remember really enjoying them as works of atmosphere, like films that utilise all aspects of sort of setting and production, cinematography and score to sort of really generate a feeling of creeping unease. And I don't remember either being particularly stand out in terms of plot, but they were strong in terms of vibes. Let's put it like that. Like, the emotions that they evoke felt very sort of very strong, very visceral. So I think when I saw the trailer for this, I was hopeful that would kind of, Perkins would kind of pull that off again, which I guess I kind of correctly anticipated in that way. But so that prior relationship for me with Perkins probably helps a little bit in terms of like what my expectations were. Whereas, as you said before, a lot of audience members going in cold might be a bit more like, this isn't what it said on the tin. But you're a big fan of Perkins.
I am a fan of the whole Perkins family.
Yeah,
Anthony, Oz, Elvis. Great people.
Brilliant names.
Yeah, phenomenal. Great family. Similarly to you, I watched them at the time. I really enjoyed the atmosphere. That is a word that's going to come up a lot in this conversation, I think.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I really felt even through that, those early trailers, and when I first watched the film, I rarely do this, when I went to a press screening a couple of weeks ago already, I stopped taking notes like 10, 15 minutes in, because I was just consumed by it. Yeah. I was fully in the world of the film, and I think he really has, as you say, plot is not the main driver of his films, and I think the plotting is kind of the almost circumstantial in this film. It really does follow the serial killer boilerplate plot mechanics almost to a T. But the way that he creates atmosphere and dread consistently from the minute the film starts till it ends, I think he's really taken it up a notch.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
So noticeably, because you could say The Black Coat's Daughter and Pretty Little Thing are, they kind of go for the same kind of atmosphere, different films, but generally, kind of big, spooky, open environments, very wintry films. Yes. And this one was just, and I'm going to try to figure out what I mean by this throughout our chat. It genuinely felt satanic. Yes. Yeah, it's like a weird satanic experience, isn't it? And there were the parts of it that I felt were like burnt into my retinas. Yeah. Like not even just my partner and I were discussing earlier, even like the red of the opening credits was like completely screwed my eyeballs afterwards for a while. Like I just couldn't see colours properly because it was just so visceral. And like blacks were looking navy and all of that kind of stuff. And it was just like a weird satanic experience. It's just an evil little experience, isn't it? Yeah. And I love that sensation because like that true weirdness, I've only really experienced with films like Kenneth Anger's work or some of those weird 70s witch films that I loved watching for a project a while back. And when you see something, you're like, oh, I think this has something in it that feels really threatening. And I know it's just a, MP4 file, but I feel like I should delete it immediately after watching this.
It's cursed.
Yeah.
It's cursed. You've got 7 days now, I'm afraid. Yeah, no, exactly that. It's like, I just was very, very uncomfortable. I loved it, and I loved being uncomfortable, but there are a few films, especially in recent memory, that I have that were like, I don't feel good. And it's not because I'm waiting to jump out of my skin. I just genuinely feel like I've watched something that is a little bit evil.
So let's get into it. Who is Longlegs?
The stuff of fucking nightmares, Anna.
Who's Mr. Legs?
Who is Mr. Legs? I don't know. We don't know. That's kind of in large part what is so uncomfortable about the whole fucking thing. It's like this, there's that Longlegs themselves is like a blank even in the marketing, isn't it? It's sort of, we don't get to see them, and that kind of lack of them being there, that absence sort of really contributes to that whole element of unease and unknowing. It's like the place where you begin to sort of conjure the worst that your brain could possibly imagine. So you kind of you've got like no context for who Longlegs is or why they're really doing what they're doing, or even when we eventually see them, like, I felt a bit weird about whether I was like, is their appearance real? Is it fake? Is it a mask? Is it like some botched plastic shirt? Like, I didn't even know whether to give them a specific pronoun because there's sort of nothing really concrete to decipher there. It's sort of, not being able to account for any of that makes them feel very otherworldly. Like, are they a person or are they something else?
I felt exactly the same, and I've watched the film twice now, and the second time without the kind of the hype surrounding me, I was really zeroed in on the performances. And even for the very first minute, we'll talk about the Nick Cage of it all, but I love that Longlegs is sort of like something a child would scribble, trying to draw a nightmare they had. There's something childlike but also deeply upsetting, something that doesn't quite look human. And I don't mean this in a terrible way. It might come out terribly, but use that as a caveat. The mask and the design of the face, which genuinely, I was like, is that a mask? Is that prosthetics plus makeup? It reminded me of Betty Davis and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. That caked on white stage makeup that she sort of, never cleansed and then just put more white stage makeup on for years and years and years. Like,
just layered and layered. Yeah.
Like zero moisturizing. And at the same time, very later day Michael Jackson.
Yes.
Where you're like, I'm not sure what has happened. How much of this is illness, how much of this is plastic surgery, how much of this is makeup, and that kind of uncanniness, because you're not quite sure whether you're looking at a mask or a face, is exactly where Longlegs exists for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the name, like, if you were coming up with a serial killer name, Longlegs wouldn't be like the scariest thing you'd come up with. It does sound like something a child would come up with, like a Slender Man or a long legs kind of. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, there is something just, very childlike about it. And I think as an audience member, like as a viewer, there's an expectation that from the film we will start to gather like their backstory and their motivations. It'll all be kind of revealed to us over time. And we kind of don't get that. We know they've sort of chosen these all-American, all-Christian families to kind of, permeate and corrupt. And we know they're big on birthdays, but like we don't actually know a lot about them, do we?
We know 3 things about Longlegs. They're really into birthdays. Mm-hmm. They're really into T-Rex.
Yes.
And they're really into
arts
Satan.
And crafts. And arts and crafts, making dolls.
Okay, four things. Birthdays, T-Rex, arts and crafts, Satan.
Which on paper sounds great. Sounds like someone I would want to hang out with.
I'd hang out with Longlegs.
Right? I don't know. In reality, really, really really freaky. But also I had an idea in my head because I'd heard these tried not to listen or read too much about the film in advance of seeing it. But of course you start to hear about the Nick Cage-ness of it all. And so I was expecting like this, big presence, and there is a big performance for Longlegs, but there's not a lot of screen time and not a lot of involvement in the murders. Like the whole Longlegs' part in the whole wider narrative is like a lot smaller than I expected. It's kind of a bit like John Doe in Seven or something. Like it's
totally,
which is not what I expected at all.
And kind of like Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal Lecter is basically on screen for 10 minutes out of the whole film, but he's the big bad wolf. But
he's just in a cage.
Yeah, but I kind of dig that Longlegs actually, not only is he not in the film too much, because I think too much of that sort of character will just diffuse the potency of him. At the same time, too much of Nick Cage with this kind of character might have been too much. And I wanted to ask you, what did you think? Yeah, I'm going to caveat this. I love Nick Cage. I think we have culturally decided that he's some sort of hack, but I think he's a genuinely phenomenal actor. I wrote a brilliant actor. Very long piece about how much I love Nick Cage for the BBC a while back. But what do you think of his performance here?
As I said, I think if I didn't have a slight vibe in advance from a few people that, there is a very Nick Cage performance in this film, I might have been a bit more, not taken aback by it, but kind of like, right, yeah, he's doing this kind of, the Mandy performance. But I was kind of a little bit geared up for it. And actually, I thought it worked. For me, it worked really well because it still felt very, very chilling for me. And I felt it was another uncanny experience that I knew it was Nick Cage in there behind all that makeup. Yes. But I couldn't quite see it at the same time.
Same.
It sort of sounded a bit like him, but it also didn't. And I could sort of see his eyes, but were they his eyes? And it was really difficult to decipher again. Do you know what I mean? Did you have the same thing?
Exactly the same thing. And honestly, I sort of forgot that it was Nick Cage up until the moment in the car where he just started screaming and sort of singing. Yeah. And I did remember kind of being taken out of the film. I'm like, this doesn't feel very Longlegs. This feels very Nick Cage though. Mm-hmm. But I kind of love that we cannot see his face. And he's got Nick Cage has just a distinctive, unique face. And because a lot of it is so expressive and very malleable, and he kind of changes his appearance and the way his face moves constantly, at least in the first part of his career. And here I'm like, okay, great. He's sort of he's using the extreme makeup and the extreme characterization to really just kind of make us forget about the fact that he's Nick Cage. Mm-hmm. And I loved what he was doing with the voice.
Creepy, like semi motherly. Did he say he was sort of channeling his mother in the performance? Which it has. It's like he emulates like the sort of the tone and the movements of like a caregiver or like a motherly figure, but in a way that's like absolutely not fucking right. Like it's really off kilter, and it's not. It's just very wrong. There's just something very wrong about the whole thing. It just doesn't feel. It is that uncanniness, I guess.
Yeah, and that was my favorite part. It was actually the voice, the way that he spoke, the way that he spoke to children in particular in those scenes when he speaks to young Lee in one of the very first scenes of the film is really chilling.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just the voice. There's definitely a thing about voices in this, because I think. Yeah, Longlegs' voice, and even like, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but Lee Harker's mother's voice is like, when she's talking to her on the phone, there's just something not quite, no one sounds quite right in this film. But going back to the Longlegs performance, the Nick Cage performance, like a lot of the criticism I've read seems to be leveled at this kind of, quote unquote OTT performance, but I thought it was used more sparingly.
I agree. I just think that there's a bias against Nick Cage, but also I do think that people just, whenever they see his name, they sort of expect something, and when they see that confirmed in one way or another, they're like, oh, well, see, I told you, he's a hack.
I was right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But the absurdity of it kind of works so well within the context of that satanic panic, doesn't it? It's like, I mean, you know, we listen back on it and, you know, it was a very real panic at that time. But when you listen back on it now via sort of true crime podcasts and documentaries, it's completely ridiculous, you know, like whole communities sacrificing children and babies. And there's like a level of can't say the word absurdity that you laugh at, but it's also deeply troubling. And that's kind of the reaction I had whilst watching Cage on screen.
And I want to talk about Satan in a minute.
Me too, always.
I always want to talk about Satan. But let's talk a little bit about, you know, Micah Monroe, who plays the rookie FBI agent, and then the character of her mom, played by Alicia Witt. Let's start with Micah. Her whole character is kind of a trope or an archetype of the serial killer movie, you know, the rookie detective who's in over their head. How does she play this character? What does she add to it?
So you're right. When you first meet Lee Harker, she's like new to the FBI and clearly one of the only female agents in a very, you know, male dominated world. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, we've seen this before. We know this trope. But Monroe's performance feels like more, I don't know if I say reserved, like a bit awkward, maybe a little like even vacant or flat at times. Like, and unlike some of the other sort of female protagonists we've had in sort of serial killer movies, at least, who seem sort of compelled by their career or justice or like a strong sense of morality, who sort of grow in courage and feistiness. I feel like Lee is someone who's compelled to continue for some other reason, which sort of, it kind of scratches at the edge of something otherworldly or sort of deep rooted in her own past. And there's a real kind of fragility and vulnerability there with her, which is, underpinned by all that sort of past and recent trauma, you know, like seeing her colleague die, that I found really effective. It's kind of, she's definitely not, for me, she's not Clarice Starling, you know, it's just a very, very different lead character.
That's so interesting that you mentioned vulnerability, because one of the things I really liked about her is that she felt really invulnerable, in the sense that she was shocked when someone got their brains blasted out in front of her. Yeah. But she, like you mentioned it, that she's not really motivated by a sense of justice. She's almost like compelled by efficiency, you know? Compelled by that, order. Yeah. It's like, I want to solve this puzzle. I want to solve this situation. I'm going to organize everything. I'm going to do the most work. I'm going to keep all of these facts in my head, and I'm going to operate based on that. And I kind of love that she has no... she really struggles with sort of in social situations. Yeah. And that voice element, which again fully contributes to the atmosphere, the unease of the whole film, is also a great source of humor. Like when her boss's daughter is like, do you want to come to my birthday party? And she just she clearly wants to say no.
Like, I'll be there.
Yeah. It's like, why does this doll have no head? Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. There's like an element of control and order there that she has, that she feels compelled by, which makes sense when you once you start gathering this picture of what may or may not have happened to her in her past, that actually it kind of makes sense that she wants to keep everything lined up and boxed in and sort of, worked out and solved in a way that feels, very different to what may or may not have come before. And a lot of her life before also feels like quite a blank space too. Like there's parts of her childhood that she can't account for. And of course there's also the argument that maybe she's being compelled or hypnotized or, you know, mesmerized or led along this path as well because of her connection to Longlegs, because of the weird doll. The weird doll that's controlling everyone's minds.
Yeah. More on that later.
More on that later.
Yeah.
Put a pin in there.
But the influence of Silence of the Lambs is just so clear to me, especially, I mean, it's very obvious in so many things, but especially in the character of Lee Harker. And I know she's not supposed to be Clarice Starling, but she sort of is Clarice Starling, even in the way that she's, you know, characterized with the ponytail and the drab gray suits, you know. She pretty much, she's not cosplaying Clarice, but I think it's the first character we think of when we see sort of a young female FBI agent pursuing a serial killer. And even the way that she's enmeshed with Longlegs from the very start, the way that she takes and almost supernaturally seems to see what he might be after. And then he helps her as well. That's very Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, that's very true.
One thing that sort of feels a little bit abandoned after it's first introduced is the whole psychic subplot. Did that work for you? Did that make sense for you?
Did it make sense? I think I sort of assumed that the clairvoyance or the sort of intuitiveness she had that was seemingly supernatural at the beginning. It was kind of the one element, wasn't it, quite early on, that you had this, with all of our sort of knowledge and expectations of sort of police procedurals and of true crime, you know, as you say, you meet this FBI agent and there's this mysterious serial killer with all the telltale signatures and the cipher and all these crime scenes. It feels very sort of formulaic. It feels like something we're quite, you know, we know quite well, we're quite comfortable with. But then there is this strange, from the start, this strange, slightly different aspect with Lee with this, clairvoyant ability. And it felt a little bit odd and out of place. But then I kind of just assumed later as that sort of, it does kind of get dropped, doesn't it? But for me, I assumed it was just as she gathered the knowledge that actually her intuitiveness or her clairvoyancy might have actually been like an aspect of repressed memory, actually, or something, you know, from her past that she wasn't quite remembering. So it was coming to her almost like deja vu, or that her knowledge of the killer and the situation was actually because she had had contact with him before. So it was, but it was playing out in a way that she didn't quite understand. So that was kind of my personal reading of it. But
do you know what? I'm going to subscribe to that, because actually that feeds in really well in the way that the whole film is playing around and exploring memories. Sure. And both, you know, not just Lee Harker's memories, but also the memories of her mother, also Kiernan Shipka's character, you know, this sort of almost victim of Longlegs, who sort of has been catatonic for years and all of a sudden comes back to life and, you know, remembers things. And as you mentioned, it's also such a whole narrative element of the Satanic Panic, this whole thing of, oh, they're repressed memories or implanted memories, fake memories. Yeah, that is basically the whole thing that got people so like tied up in a tizzy. They were like, oh my God, they're putting fake memories in our heads, so we can't even trust our own mind.
Can't even trust yourselves. Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that actually at the time. It's a really good point. But actually, and also, can I say, incredible performance from Kiernan Shipka. Like, just, really great performance. I've only seen her in like Sabrina. So
it's interesting because I was a bit less in love with that performance.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
And I really like her. I like her and everything. And I think it was maybe the second time I watched it, but maybe this is part of the whole thing of the film, right? Where I'm like, the dialogue is so sort of, I think, you know, old-timey American sort of old-fashioned speak.
Yeah, she does speak in a very, it's very noticeable, isn't it? That she feels out of step with the time she's in. But actually quite a lot of this film feels like a lot of the set pieces and the settings and sort of, there's so much of it, like the color schemes and everything feels like a little bit like it's not in the 90s. It feels like it could be kind of like 20, 30 years before. It's, got that weird sense of, I just think the whole thing, as you say, like the that aspect of sort of memory and lack of memory and blank spaces. There's just this entire element of sort of, it's all tied together in this lack of understanding and this mistrust of the entire situation. You've got this big empty spot in Lee's memory of her birthday and her mother's eccentric behaviour, which seems really indicative of sort of a troubled mind. She's quite stubborn, isn't she, in her refusal to remember. So you've got all of this, you've got all of these fragments and fragments of the past that you were told through the narrative, through those kind of flashback scenes and the opening scene. But I just felt by the end that none of it was very trustworthy to me at all. Like, how can we trust what we see or what we're told? How much of it is just story? How much of it is conspiracy? Certainly ties into the satanic panic aspect of it. But there's this, there's all this, like the act of purposeful forgetting or blanking out.
That, I think, is the core of what unsettles about the film, because we expect, and this kind of ties into the other thing I want to talk about, which is this ties into our expectations of a serial killer movie.
Absolutely.
It is, obviously I'm knee deep into it with the series, and we're about 20 episodes in and there's a few more to go, but watching them kind of so consistently over the past couple of months, I was already a fan, but there are clear tropes and they're clear sort of narrative conventions that set up expectations. Serial killer movies are a puzzle primarily, and we expect that puzzle to be solved. And part of the puzzle is the puzzle of the mind of the killer, right? Why would someone kill? Why would someone kill repeatedly? Why would someone kill in this particular way that they're killing it, right? Which is the birthday murders at the start of this. And because by the end of the film, we don't know what reality or whose recollection we can trust, because we're seeing one thing, but we're being told another, and we were shown something else, and none of it actually feels like real life, like you said.
Yeah.
Because the 90s, like you said, the 90s in the film don't feel like any particular year, really. We know it's the 90s because we see a giant portrait of Bill Clinton hanging.
Repeatedly. Yeah, he's more present in this film than Longlegs. He's everywhere.
Maybe he's a real Longlegs.
Yeah, he's the real, You heard it here first.
Yeah, I mean, don't sue me. Allegedly, the real Longlegs.
Allegedly.
But it's this untrustworthiness of memories that infects the narrative of the film. So by the end of the film, we're like, wait, so is Satan real? So was Longlegs and Lee's mom correct? The devil is real in this reality?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a whole, the more I think about it, the more I just get like deeper and deeper and more bogged down in it. And I just think maybe none of it's real. None of this is what is happening. And all that kind of grand narrative that you'd expect from a serial killer around the, the sort of, the rules that he works by and his grand master plan and all of the conspiracy around it kind of comes to like nothing, especially the stuff that Longlegs is talking about. He's like, doing this, fulfilling this. And then he just, it's done. And now I've killed myself. And it's like, all of that didn't really come to much. It doesn't, basically, this film doesn't care about the puzzle at all. Yes,
you're right. And I think that's kind of one of the key points that I want to talk about. Perkins said that he has said repeatedly that he doesn't really care about serial killers, doesn't really care about serial killer movies. So then, and the film doesn't really care about the puzzle that we expect from serial killer movies. So how then does this serial killer movie fare within that subgenre?
It's a funny one, isn't it? And I think the main comparisons I've seen are obviously Silence of the Lambs, Seven, and Cure.
Cure is an interesting one.
Yeah, that's kind of, I've seen that comparison as well, which kind of makes sense. And as you say, there's all these sort of well-established, well-worn tropes that are sort of set up at the beginning, the occult or the satanic aspects. But then there are sort of several different things that, for me, set this film apart from others in the subgenre. And they were the things that made the whole experience feel very fresh and exciting. So, as you say, there are some inversions of those tropes, like, as we say, the mystery of who Longlegs is and what they do, their sort of absence for a lot of the film, the fact that they die quite early, also that as a sort of consistent with Perkins' previous work, that sense that the film is concerned with atmosphere and the feelings that it generates for each viewer, sort of I keep saying the vibes, but it is basically the vibes over the procedural plot itself. So every time I've seen someone sort of point out a plot hole on the internet about this, it kind of feels superfluous. It's like, but it doesn't matter. Like, the direction and the cinematography does this great job of generating that really sinister atmosphere. Like, you spend so much time with those wide shots, searching the wider frame for something threatening, and it often doesn't even happen. It's what your mind conjures there. But then when it does happen, it almost comes as an even bigger shock. So it's kind of one of the most affecting films I've seen in a long time, because I felt like I had seen, it's almost like the mythos around it. I felt like I had seen something truly awful and evil and uncanny and, grim. But actually there wasn't that much in, it wasn't the most violent film I've ever seen. It wasn't the scariest film I've ever seen. It wasn't all of those things, but for some reason it has still stuck with me as something extremely uncomfortable and sort of terrifying because of those things. So it felt like one of the most effective police procedurals I've seen, despite the fact that the crucial, procedural plot, the mystery of solving the killer, kind of doesn't even really matter.
Totally. And it's sort of, that's, I think, what I mean when I said at the beginning that this film felt satanic.
Yeah.
And not in the sense that this film is evil and it's cursed or whatnot. It's more that you're watching it for one purpose, but it's actually serving you up something else entirely different. And the moments where it flagged for me was actually were the moments where it lost the conviction in its own language, in its own cinematic language. So the third act, where we get the twist reveal that Lee's mom has been an accomplice of Longlegs for the past 30 years. She's the one who's been delivering the satanic dolls, and she's been Longlegs' landlady for 30 years.
Yep.
And it's sort of delivered in voiceover and flashbacks. And that is the point, especially watching it a second time. I was thinking, I don't need this. This is taking me out, because you're explaining the plot, but the plot is not what I'm here for. I'm here, for lack of a better word, for the vibe. Yeah. And you're ruining the vibe by explaining to me that what the vibe is. The vibe cannot be defined. I'm sorry I've said
define the vibe.
Sorry I've said vibe so much. But
it's true. Yeah. It is true. And it's a kind of plot twist that, like, isn't really a plot twist, because when Lee's sort of talking about an accomplice, basically I got a sense that the mum was going to come back in a big way with this, and she was going to be linked in some way with Longlegs and perhaps as the accomplice. So it didn't feel like a big shock, but then I don't think it was necessarily, as you say, like, designed to be a big shock. It wasn't really concerned with whether we were surprised by that or not. And for me, the things that I took away were, the feeling of unease, and some of those single images, like that still of Longlegs' face in the FBI interview room when they're upstairs, and the black hooded figure with the eyes. As soon as those things I just thought, fuck, this is just going to stay with me for a while. These horrible single images are going to be burnt into my brain for a while. I'm going to be thinking about these in the dark at night. So it wasn't the larger narrative. I didn't really care. Well, not that I didn't really care, but I kind of didn't really care about that. It was the sum of everything, wasn't it? And just how it made me feel.
You mentioned earlier that there were these moments where you're sort of looking around in the background of these very wide frames for something evil to be there. And actually the images that most stuck with me, that I found most unsettling, and where the film worked the most, was when the evilness was just in close-up. It was just there looking you straight in the eyes, in the same way as the reveal with the mom, which wasn't that much of a twist. And the fact that they sort of continued explaining the twist over and over again really ended up just being a bit but it's the shots of her just looking straight into the camera and shooting someone. It's the shot of Alicia Witt saying, "Hail Satan," with the complete blank eyes of a true believer. And what I found really interesting, and I was reading a few interviews with Perkins before recording, is that, you know, he's been talking a lot about how this film is about parenting and how in many ways this film is about his mother and the stories that his family created, or that any family creates about themselves, the stories for the outside and the stories that a family tells themselves about themselves. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because I was finding it so curious that he would volunteer and be so open and so clear about the fact that he's had a very like unusual family life. And both his parents were in the public eye, and we, you know, even as viewers or as people with Google, know way too much about his family's past and his parents' past than we would of any other person. And this isn't about the Nepo baby conversation. It's more like what I found really interesting about the second viewing of this film, and I actually would encourage people to watch it several times, is that it is so much about memories and stories that we tell ourselves that are not strictly true or untrue either. They are necessary for whatever purpose parents have in that moment. And I'm kind of saying it in a convoluted way, but you know, like, a parent is not going to just tell their kid, "Oh, you were almost abducted by a serial killer."
Yeah.
They're going to tell them, "Oh, you shouldn't talk to that man. He's not a nice man." You know, and, you know, it's really simplifying it here, but the fact that we can get to a point, or these characters can get to a point where they believe the stories that they told a child at some point is a really chilling thing if you put it into context with something like the Satanic Panic of the 80s. If you put it into context with any faith, if you put it into context with, like, you know, since we're going to talk about Satan himself, right? It's like, oh, the Kool-Aid is so thoroughly drunk that you forgot that you were going to pretend to drink the Kool-Aid so that you could save your kid from this, like, child murderer.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah. What you say, almost like what you said about the necessary, like the necessary lie or the necessary stories we tell ourselves. Because, I'd thought about that, the context of the Satanic Panic and the way that they, you know, the lies we as I think, sort of on a broader scale, like the lies we as a society tell each other and ourselves to kind of absolve ourselves of certain guilt. I'd thought a lot about that. But yeah, you're on a more personal, you know, mother and daughter level in this film. I think Perkins had said, like a mother can lie, but she can lie out of love. Like it really is a necessary lie for her. And the stories that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with the ending and theories about what happens. But, you know, a lot of this film I also see as a story for Lee, and that becomes a necessary story that she must tell herself in order to make sense of what is happening and to kind of come to terms and sort of, just survive what is happening, really. So, when we're sort of faced, there's something about the face of evil and that evil in the everyday that we can't, you know, we try and paper over some of the most inhuman parts of humanity, and we have to do that in order to, it's a necessary lie in order to survive, or there are necessary memories that we have to block out. But but there's something, it's
uneasy.
It is.
It's an uneasy thought even to think about, you know, like what have we blocked out, or what were we told as kids that we didn't really understand the reality of, and then after a certain point you forget, or you never even have that memory in the first place because you have the story that an adult told you.
Just becomes a truth, doesn't it? And everyone starts to believe it. But it is interesting that Perkins has referred to this as sort of, you know, a very, like, his most personal film. And that hadn't quite occurred to me until he was talking about it. And it's very much openly talking about, you know, a mother and a daughter much like a mother and a son, and like this big lie between them. And it must be, I came out of this, you know, the expectation was that this is a film about a deranged, oddball serial killer and that kind of cat and mouse chase between the FBI agent and the killer. But in the end, it really does feel very much like a film about a mother and a daughter and the stories between them. And that was something that I hadn't expected. And again, that was something I really liked. And some other people might not have found that as satisfying. But I thought that was, I found that was really interesting. And there's just a very perverse, I don't know, there's some very strange semblances of maternity in this film that just, all of it just doesn't feel right, does it? I keep saying that, but it's true. It's just off. It's just fully off, Anna. Bad vibes.
And that's the Satan of it all.
Oh, yes, it is.
So let's talk about Satan.
Hail Satan.
So,
oh, hail.
I don't even know how to frame this. So, you know, we was talking a little bit about the satanic panic and how it's woven into this, and this entire conversation, and I think we're sort of nailing it as we go, trying to understand why the entire film feels like it is a satanic text. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I genuinely mean that it sort of captured the vibe that I imagine is a satanic vibe.
Yeah.
And so how does it incorporate the devil and the occult in the story? You know, what does it exist in a film where the devil is actually real by the end of it? What's up with the Satan dolls and the Satan vapor? Why is T-Rex involved?
There's quite a lot going on, really.
It's a lot, yeah.
There is quite a lot going on. It's a fun, and again, like, the more I think about it, the more I can't make up my mind. I kind of come out with one thought, and then today I'm firmly on the devil isn't real camp, whereas yesterday I was probably more in the Satan lives camp. But yeah, the sort of, I think the satanic and the occult elements of this film, coupled with Cage's performance, are what most, or some viewers probably, you know, have criticised the most, or sort of classify as the absurd elements of the film. And they sort of, kind of increase in absurdity as they go on. As you say, there's sort of the tropey sort of the cryptic messages, the references to the Book of Revelation, there's hypnosis and mind control, there's cursed objects. It's all kind of things we've seen before, and it's kind of got a similar vibe to Hereditary in a way that we begin in a world that feels very real and very grounded in reality, and then we move towards something that feels a bit more like magical realism, like it unfolds in a sort of increasingly fantastical way, which is quite a different tone to the beginning, which is where you get this sort of dual aspect, which is quite hard to sort of grasp or explain, or kind of get in advance of seeing the film. But they're the tropey aspects, and it's all sort of something that I've seen before. But as I said before, I get the sense also throughout these things that a lot of that kind of culminates to not much in the grand scheme of things. And what we are left with is the sort of reality of Lee's trauma, her mother's betrayal, the trauma that they share, and those stories that you say kind of, you know, that they've been telling themselves. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of... The bits that people laughed at in the cinema, it's kind of ridiculous and it's sort of nothing. But at the same time, you know, especially in the 80s and 90s, it was something that we were legitimately very, very scared of. Like whole communities were terrified and really believed in these stories. So there's something really unnerving and really horrible about them at the same time as them being kind of a bit silly.
Well, kind of a bit silly in retrospect for sure. But, you know, there's a lot of things happening in the world where we're like, surely this is silly. Are we seriously doing this? Oh, yes, we are doing this, apparently. Yeah. But there's something about, you know, the devil is real thing. So kind of just in the world of the film, say Lee is sort of a little bit psychic, or maybe she's just on the spectrum. You know, I think the film very heavily codes her. Micah Monroe's performance is very heavily coded autistic in this film. But by the end of it, there's this whole thing of, oh wait, no, the murder dolls are real, the Satan dolls. So, and Lee kind of has these very aggressive memory flashbacks and situation, and her boss kills his entire family, kills his wife, and she has to kill her mother to protect the little girl Ruby. And the little girl Ruby is like obsessed with a Satan doll.
Yeah, she's fully in there, isn't she?
Totally. So I'm like, I think the devil might be real. And there's that shot of the figure which is just like cloaked in black with sort of weird eyes. And I'm like, I think their plan might have worked. Not entirely clear on what the plan is.
Yes.
But something has happened. So I don't think this is the happy ending, even though all the people who are doing the murdering are now dead.
Oh, there's no happy endings here.
No.
Oh God, no. No, absolutely no. Yeah. There's no happy endings. And as you say, there's either the scenario where the devil is real and, you know, she, they've completed their plan, but actually, they're going to carry on. And, you know, these terrible nightmarish acts of violence and cruelty will continue. And, you know, the nightmare continues for Lee and this horrible thing has happened. Or, I don't know, I guess the alternative is that the devil isn't real and is Lee facing like a total mental collapse in some way? Like how much of that ends is actually happening at all? I don't know, but there's really not a happy ending either way. Like,
or both. Satan is real and Lee's having a mental breakdown.
Absolutely.
I mean, she does witness like so many up close killings.
Yeah.
It's kind of intense. Like outside of when she on her first assignment, boom, partner gets shot in the head.
She sees a lot of people shot in the head, doesn't she?
And then she has to witness Longlegs have his whole little I'm gonna smash my face on the table thing.
Yeah.
That was a lot. That ruined her blouse.
Yeah. And she just carries on. Like you say, she's almost like compelled to carry on, or she just carries on almost in, I don't know, like autopilot or something. But the culmination of all of that, I mean, I wouldn't have a brain cell left. I'd be done.
I mean, yeah, I'd be like, well, I guess I'm the new Longlegs now.
Yeah.
I guess that's what's happening. Yeah. Because the other thing I wanted to ask about the ending, so we've spoken about the twist and the fact that it's bleak as fuck. What do you think is going to happen to Miss Ruby?
I don't know. I was trying to think about that. Nothing good. I'm not sure. I can't, there's nothing good, is it? I can't picture. I really can't picture. It was one of those things where I really can't picture what will happen next.
Because I don't think she wakes up from the trance. She's like fully, completely obsessed with her Satan doll.
Yeah, because I know she tried to shoot the Satan doll and it didn't shoot, did it? But no, I think there is a sense of kind of, it's not quite, I think that at the moment there have been a lot of films recently that feels like there's a trend of really depressing, really grim hopelessness at the end of a lot of horror films where you think, oh my God, that ended that isn't quite it here, but there certainly isn't a happy ending. Like I can't see a way in which anyone comes out of that feeling okay, and there's no way for it to make sense. Like I can't find an ending for me that makes a lot of sense, that I understand. It just, again, it's this whole aspect of not quite understanding what I've seen or what I'm feeling. I'm not confused by the ending. I actually think it's the right level of bleakness. And it feels like a nightmare, and it feels like the ending in particular, that shot of Lee wanting to shoot the doll, but we sort of see it from the doll's perspective, is, and as she quibbles, she doubts. Because, and I think that's where that kind of magic or dark magic element is hiding in plain sight, right? Because if she shoots the doll, then is she destroying something much more powerful than she is? Yeah.
Is she going to destroy the little girl because she's so attached to the doll now? Like we don't really know the rules.
Yeah,
nobody really knows the rules.
There are no rules here.
How the fuck did Longlegs learn how to like package Satan into dolls?
Yeah,
how did that happen?
There's a whole, there's a whole, yeah, as you say, it's kind of not necessary, and yet we really don't know how or why any of this has happened. Like, what did you think about the dolls? Did you find that aspect?
Well,
how did you find it?
I find dolls in general, like life-size dolls, very creepy.
They are very creepy, aren't they? Especially when they have human hair.
Stop it. Also, side note, apparently there's a website called Slavic Hair where people of Slavic origin, like myself, are sort of, you can donate hair or you can sell your hair. And apparently it goes for a lot of money. So I'm growing my hair out. That's my retirement plan.
I was going to say, keep that in your back pocket.
Exactly. So you think it's a joke? It's not.
It's not. No, I respect that. Fully respect that. Go for it.
My mind went there when you mentioned human hair and dolls instantly. Creepy as fuck in principle, in practice. I like them as a horror element. I think they're instantaneously really off-putting. I loved that scene where they discover a doll buried in this abandoned barn.
Oh, yeah, the barn.
Love that.
Great scene.
I love the shot of Lee's mom shooting what looks like a little girl, but it's not. It's the doll of Lee as a little girl. There's all sorts of like, the child you metaphors that can be, I'm sure, people online will write very intense Substack essays about. But I just as a horror go-to, as a visual go-to, always love a creepy doll. And I don't particularly want to know the mechanics of how Satan powders put into their brains and can then sort of convince the actual little children that they need to just, what are they going to do? Just watch their entire families die? That how those dolls convince entire families to kill each other? We'll never know. Do we need to know? Probably not. It would ruin the vibe.
It would ruin the vibe. I was literally about to say that. Vibe's ruined.
So, is there anything that we haven't covered about Longlegs?
The only thing I just thought of, actually, was that you mentioned T-Rex.
Yes.
And the involvement of...
Why?
Why? Well, initially, I just kind of assumed the use of T-Rex and that kind of... the glam rock visual of Longlegs, in the basement room. It felt very reminiscent of Buffalo Bill, right? Who has
totally.
That glam rock vibe too. So I was like, yeah, fine. And then I was thinking about Nick Cage himself, who's a bit of a rock star and has that kind of like cosmic rock, cosmic horror vibe that sits so well with him. And I think maybe I'm not an expert on T-Rex. I feel like T-Rex and Mark Bowen have that kind of black magic vibe too, like lyrically, and within that sort of era of all rock stars having a reputation. Again, that storytelling around like the Stones and Bowie, and, you listen to these records backwards, they have these kind of evil satanic messages. I just kind of assumed it was all of that. But then when I listened to your interview with Oz Perkins, he kind of just said it was just kind of like the music, right?
I was really interested in this as well. I love the music of T-Rex, and I asked Oz Perkins about this, and he had a very cryptic answer, which honestly felt very on brand for his films. But apparently also on Reddit, and I love Reddit users, sometimes they said that, it was said that Lucifer was the angel of music, and then T-Rex symbolized Lucifer. Then I think it was, everyone on the rock scene, on the glam rock scene, was really into like occult stuff in the 70s and 80s. That's what I assumed. But then, there's a lot more occult leaning bands like Led Zeppelin were very openly into and, hung about with Aleister Crowley and were very into magic shit and put that in their music. I think that is very much on the surface. I don't know if there's any actual significance. I think it was just he had this sort of ethereal musical vibe, and maybe it was just that Perkins listened to his music when he was writing the movie.
Yeah. And I've quite enjoyed, there's been a few interviews with Perkins, haven't there, where, you know, as movie viewers and horror lovers, we give so much significance to everything. And I'm literally doing it with this podcast now, reading into every element and trying to second guess what happened and why. And then Perkins quite a few times has kind of just said, like, we were just having fun with it. Like, it doesn't feel like a film that, you know, the director would necessarily be like, well, we were just having a good time. And this felt like it would be a good time for the audience. And, you know, I just thought it would be cool. And yeah, I was just listening. This is purely circumstance. And it just kind of came together that way. And I didn't know whether he was just being deliberately cryptic or, yeah, it's almost like not what you'd anticipate, because you'd expect this grand narrative again around, you know, what's happening and why and when and why it was all carefully crafted together. But some of it does feel a bit more just like, because we wanted to have fun.
And also, because I guess they just really liked rock. Like he said in this one interview that Perkins said that he thought of Longlegs as a rock and roll film. And that he had even conceived of Longlegs, Mr. Legs, as a former glam rock singer, which...
cool.
Just like, honestly, I don't need that detail. I don't need it.
No.
I choose to erase that from my memory, much like Lee Harker's mother does to a lot of the shit that she does in the film.
Yep.
I just think it's kind of empty, but not empty. Empty in the sense that it doesn't have to mean something super specific.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's one of those things, you know, where sometimes, you know, you get if you're of a certain age or a certain disposition or have imbibed certain things, you might put on a T-Rex album and you'd be like, you know what? I feel like I'm seeing the universe and I'm floating through space. And that is the vibe of the music. Nothing is actually happening to you.
Yeah.
And I think that is the vibe that the film is going for, except
for sure,
the vibe is Satan, as we've discussed.
Yeah. The vibe is extremely evil.
So I think unless there's something you wanted to add about Longlegs, I think
we've pretty much covered everything. Other than I'm done. I mean, I only saw it last night, but I'm really keen to go and see it again this week. There's so much to take from it, and I just really enjoyed that there wasn't anything specific to take away from it. That everyone, you know, you're kind of left to take what you want from it. And there were people that left my screening. There was a guy that left our screening and was just like, said to his girlfriend, like, do not remind me never to go and see a Nicolas Cage film again.
Oh,
like,
that's
really angry.
Rude.
And, it's just dramatic, isn't it? But, you know, and then there were other people that were, you know, really freaked out. And I feel like this is a film that has that kind of, you know, a lot of the really great horror films, or at least the cult horror films, have like a mythos around them. And there'll be the sort of the mythos leading up to the film, like, you know, everyone discussing how this is the scariest film they've ever seen. And now there's sort of speculation around, are there any parts of this film that are actually based on true events?
Oh my God.
You know, is this person real? And but I kind of like it. I love it when a film creates that myth around itself, you know, and I feel like this could be one of those films where, like, if I don't watch it for a few years, I'll be like, yeah, that was a really crazy, violent, fucked up, weird movie. And then again, my memory of what the movie's like won't be the actual experience when I go back to watch it. But I have a feeling that I'm going to enjoy this film for many years to come. And it did feel like something that we haven't, really experienced before or for a while. I just think it was a great piece of provocative filmmaking.
I agree. And I think, you know, I really enjoyed both my viewings, very different experiences. And, you know, the first one was very much in a press screening in a screening room, and the second one was in an open air cinema in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. So it was very weird.
That is very strange.
And people clapped when the mother got shot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did.
That is a different vibe.
Yeah, very different vibe. But one thing I will say, I really love this film. Not because of the hype that was around it, but because I genuinely think that Osgood Perkins has a very distinct approach to horror and to storytelling. Mm. And I think he thinks in a purely cinematic way.
Yeah.
In the way that the entirety of the film is committed to whatever atmosphere, vibe, or world that he's trying to create. Mm. You know, all of his films so far feel very different from one another. So he commits to the world that the story needs to exist in. And I think this one just kind of hits in the Venn diagram of culture's interests right now, you know, serial killers, Satan, sure. Nicolas Cage, the 90s, all of these things are very in. But I'm really excited to see what he does. I'm really excited to see what he does with budget. He's got, I think, 2 films wrapped already.
Wow.
So he's got The Monkey that's coming out next year.
Of course, yeah.
And he's got another one. I'm not sure. I don't think that's been dated for yet. But I just think, and having done a short interview with him as well, I remember the thing that went through my head about 5 minutes in. I'm like, oh, none of my questions apply. You're a true filmmaker who is looking at story and character and movie making from a totally unique perspective. And you're bringing in sound. We haven't even talked about the soundscape of the film. It's like having static in your brain for an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's like brain scramble, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And a bad horror film will telegraph what it's supposed to be about outside of the plot, right? Because there's a plot and then there's the themes. And I think that an Oz Perkins film has things that it's actually interested in, but that is rarely the plot of the film.
Yeah.
That is rarely even the vibe that it's conjuring. It is something that's interesting him, and he's doing his best to transfigure that into images and sounds and something that resembles a cinema story that we can consume and digest. Does that make sense?
Anna, you're so eloquent. How do you do it? Perfectly done. I loved that. I had like little hearts in my eyes as you were talking then. I was like, damn, she's so true. It's just so true. That was true. Absolutely true.
I love an Oz Perkins picture. Give me more. I'm so excited to see what he does.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Yeah, really great. It just sounds stupid to be grateful for the experience, but I am. I'm like, that was just such an interesting time. Like, it was such a different experience to anything I've had recently, and it's generated loads of interesting conversation afterwards. And, you know, people that don't, you know, usually message me on Instagram about movies are messaging me about this film, and I just can't wait to see what's coming next too. It could, hopefully long live Oz Perkins.
I never say this, but I cannot wait for the Longlegs discourse. It's already happening, and I'm into all of it. I
think it's going to go into some really weird places.
I think
that's going to be immensely satisfying.
I mean, the Reddit is already giving so much gold.
That's going to be me this evening, actually, is digging through the Reddit files, because I haven't had a look at them yet. But, see what all the weirdos have to say.
Steph, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking about Longlegs and Satan with me.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's been a blast.
Where can listeners find and listen to more of your work online?
So you can find me on, is it called Twitter now? X, and Instagram at Steph X McKenna. If you're interested in the craft of writing and of books and of storytelling, you can check me out. I'm the co-host of a fortnightly podcast called The Writing Life. You can also regularly catch me on Evolution of Horror. And please do also check out my Stephen King zine series, Outsider, because that is it's a really fun little fan project. And I hope you all like it.